Hello and welcome to my podcast called Innervation. Innervation was inspired by my previous podcast, Silence, where over the course of 2 years, I spoke every single week with one woman from science, technology, engineering and mathematics, or STEM. In the end, I ended up speaking to about 100 women in total, and I kept all of those guests anonymous so that they could talk openly and honestly about their lives. We discussed their experiences, what they've learned along their life journeys, and their hopes and ideas for living fulfilling and contented lives. Because their identities were always kept safe, the conversations on Silence were always so raw and transparent, and we didn't just talk about being women in STEM, but about everything. The topics that tended to come up are the same topics that I discuss with my own friends and family, or my mentees, or people come up to me at the end of a talk in a school or a college and they ask me about these certain topics in private. So it seemed clear to me that there are certain things that people really want to discuss, but only keep it behind, say, closed doors or in private, because they're quite fragile issues. So what I've done is I've sifted through all the episodes of Silence to bring you my favourite sound bites on these certain topics. Each week on Innervation, I'll be reflecting on the perspectives that came up on Silence that I feel are actually pearls of wisdom from my amazing guests that I found particularly provoking, inspiring and empowering, in the hope that they resonate with you too. This week is all about acceptance. So I have actually done an episode called Self-Acceptance on Innervation before, but I wanted to do an episode on just acceptance because I feel like it's slightly different from self-acceptance. They definitely do cross over, and they will cross over in this podcast, but acceptance generally is really, really hard, and it's also really, really important. And it's something that I struggle with a lot because I'm one of these kind of control freak, perfectionist types where I just want to be able to write a million to-do lists and get organised and have everything on a spreadsheet before I can feel comfortable about anything. And sometimes I feel like acceptance is actually the only way I can truly feel a sense of liberation and freedom, because all those to-do lists and all those activities that I do to try and gain a sense of control isn't really accepting the fact that sometimes things are out of my control. And so I wanted to talk about acceptance this week because I personally find it challenging to accept life on life's terms sometimes, but I'm also really, really aware that not accepting the way life is sometimes often makes me really annoyed and frustrated, maybe even angry and resentful. And sometimes when I just let things go and say, well, you know what, I can't change the way things are, so it's just going to have to be this way, can be really relaxing. It can be a relief. And so I wanted to share some thoughts with you about this topic of acceptance. I think right off the bat, it's not just about self-acceptance in the sense of, I'm going to accept that maybe I'm not the tallest person in the world, or, the skinniest or the smartest and things like that. I think that's really important to be able to self-accept. But I think it's also a case of accepting other people as they are. And it's certainly been my experience that the way I treat myself is often how I treat other people. And so if I can be a lot more accepting of other people, then I'll probably be more accepting of myself, or vice versa. I think it's like a two-way thing. And what I've definitely found is that because I have such high expectations of my achievements and, what I expect myself to be able to deliver, I also have very high expectations of other people. And it's just not relaxed, whichever way you look at it, I get really annoyed with other people's shortcomings. And I've really realised that I get annoyed with other people's shortcomings because I get so annoyed with myself when I don't do things perfectly. And so I really had to sort of like accept more that everyone's different, that I have, skills as well as, things that I'm not so good at. And that's okay. Like, we all have strengths and weaknesses. And the more I accept my own, the more I'm able to be accepting of the way other people are. And this kind of like two-way dynamic has just been so eye-opening for me. And that's what my guest from episode 25 talks about.
Or they feel that other people feel they're different and they don't belong. And it's unfortunate if people are not accepting of everybody, whoever they are, whatever they are, whether they're male, female, or whether they're gay, or, what nationality they are. It's a pity if they're not accepted for who they are, because I think the most important thing is just to be who you are, not to try and adapt to some other model that other people think you should be.
Yeah, the idea of sort of accepting people for who they are and then accepting yourself is just so much more emotionally mature. It's just so much more elevated in, how we deal with other people. And it's just more pleasant. It's just a nicer experience of being in the world rather than always having to have things your way or, have your expectations met. I think accepting things the way they are is really, really freeing. But I'm not saying that, we sort of sit back and just let the world unfold the way it's meant to. But I think there is a kind of really important point in the middle whereby, we put in as much effort as we can to be our best, but we also have to know when to let go and say, well, I can't really change the way things are. And I think that kind of perspective is really, really difficult, especially for guests, my guests that have been from STEM industries, because, we're women who are really, really capable. We've studied really hard. We're hoping to get good jobs at the end of it all. And so we do expect a lot from ourselves and from others. But I think changing that mentality and being much more open to learning about people's talents and strengths and all of that, I think is just really rewarding. And it takes changing our perspectives on life to go from me, to actually, what do I contribute and what are other people contributing, and we're all in this together, to really have that attitude of acceptance. And I think that's what my guest from episode 27 is getting at. I think if you are able to have that kind of mentality, you're then in a much more empowered place, accepting yourself for who you are and accepting others for who they are, and not kind of having these ridiculous expectations, whether that's in a romantic situation, a work situation, a family situation, just accepting all the people in those scenarios for who they are can be really liberating, not just for you, but for other people. It just creates a much kinder, more compassionate dynamic. And that's what my guest from episode 53 talks about.
For one, my parents are very important role models in my life. They've taught me a certain strength and a perspective of like a view on life of being very just open and free to learning new things and accepting things.
Now, it is a balance, because I think we're not in... Because I think it's not about sort of like sitting back on the sofa and saying, well, I just accept the way things are, so I'm just going to let it unfold the way it's meant to. I still think we need to put in effort to be the best versions of ourselves, try and do good, try and contribute, try to, influence this world or contribute to this world in the best way that we can. But it is about knowing when to stop and when to sort of surrender all your efforts and say, the rest is up to, just the universe to help out. Because I find that, it's like with that saying that luck is 99% perseverance and 1% luck and things like that. It's like, I think it is really important to work hard. But I think there also comes a point where sometimes you just have to accept that maybe, it wasn't your time, or maybe, somebody else was meant to get that job instead, or that, you weren't meant to go and live in that country. And accepting those kinds of disappointments and realising that actually there's probably something better out there for you is a very empowered place to be. For me, whenever I meet with disappointment or challenge, I always try and tell myself, like, this is helping me grow stronger, this is helping me learn something I didn't know about, and there's always some sort of good in every single experience, good and bad. And I think with that comes a really strong sense of knowing who you are, because I think accepting things and saying, well, I'm just going to let things be, isn't really sort of knowing who you are. It's kind of, that's more of a sort of defeatist kind of attitude. But saying, no, this is what I want and I'm going to really try hard for that. And after trying hard to then say, okay, I'm going to let the universe do what it needs to do, is where the acceptance comes in. And I think my guest from episode 53 backs me up on this.
It was me accepting myself, 100%. I think when you do that, you project that confident person, and I think people are naturally attracted to people who have a sense of who they are. I think you don't want to be someone who's sort of blowing with the wind and can't make up their own mind. I think there's, and you attract people like you. I think it's nice, because you want to work with good people. You want to have good conversations, and I think there's a certain force that comes through, positive energy, when you are the best version of yourself. But yeah, you have to believe it, and it will sort of emanate, and people will feel that.
I think when we do show up and be our best, that's when we can let go and accept the way things are. I think if we're lazy and we don't try, it's difficult to accept. I think, acceptance is a lot easier when you try your best, and then sort of leave the rest up to fate or whatever. But it is a really fine balance, and it's really, really hard to strike it, because I think if you are a person that works really, really hard, you want to then go that extra mile, or if you're someone that doesn't like working hard at all, then it can be difficult to put hard work in and try and change the way things are. And I don't have the answers to what the right balance is. I think it is very much about discerning what's right and wrong in every scenario. This from episode 72.
I'm very accepting of myself and happy with myself, and I think that goes a long way. Because I know a lot of people, and I'm still, obviously struggling with that in a way, but I think I'm fairly happy with everything about myself, which is, I think, very important.
What is liberating, though, is if you are able to show up for humanity in the best way that you can and do your best, and then accept that you are part of a greater collective. I think often when we don't accept, we think that we have the power to change the way things are and that we are in control, and that it's really up to us to make a difference or make a change. And sometimes we're not that powerful. Sometimes the universe will come in and just completely, slap us across the head and just say, sorry, it's going to be done this way. I certainly feel that way with COVID. It's like, I sort of, life couldn't be more different. And it's just completely out of my control, the way life is at the moment. And, the universe has completely different ideas of the way 2020 was meant to go compared to the idea I had. And having an acceptance over that and saying, we're all in this together and this isn't personal and it isn't just being done to me, we're all going through it. And just joining a sort of having a larger sort of like macroscopic view on what's going on, and not seeing yourself as an individual and a sort of like person that is constantly sort of having to deal with problems or whatever. Realise that we're all in the same boat. And I think that sort of collective mentality comes from accepting others and accepting yourself and realising that we're all unified. And that's something I certainly tap into in my meditations, is this idea of a unified field, a place where we're all one. And I'm not the victim, and I'm not, I don't have it bad, as in like, oh gosh, everything's so much worse for me type of thing. But, realising that we're all in this together, it's very much about acceptance. It's about accepting that we're part of the human race. And that's what I think my guest from episode 74 is getting at.
So I grew up in a place that was very white. It wasn't very diverse. And it got to a point where I just assumed that I was everyone. And I became someone who just assumed that everyone's the same, regardless of what I see in colour, because I'm in a household where I've got two different colours in my household, but then I'm also walking out in the street and I see another colour, so everything is different to me, and I just assume that I am everything too. And then every now and then I check my skin, I'm like, hold on, that's not me. But I just always think it's best to be open-minded and accepting of people, unless they do something awful towards you. But realistically, everyone's a human being and should be treated with respect.
All this talk on acceptance really got me thinking about just our attitudes and, how much acceptance can really make us resentful and can really drain us and, can be a waste of our creativity. I think a lack of acceptance can really waste our time, essentially. I think it's really important to see and know and try to change things and make a difference where we can. But I think there's so much in also just throwing your hands up in the air and saying, I can't do anything about this. I really, there's a lot of things that I wish were different, especially being, a minority on a few levels. For a long, long time, I wished that there was more ethnic minority in engineering. And for a long, long time, I wished there was more women. And, and only really last year did people of colour have a chance to get their voices heard. And it's kind of, it's interesting that there's a time and a place for everything, accepting that we are making history and accepting that you may be at a time where certain issues are not important as a collective, and that, that we form part of a massive jigsaw puzzle, and that jigsaw puzzle is just the way it is, that's where the acceptance is. So I'll leave you with a quote from episode 100. She was the very last guest I had on Silence, where I kept all of my guests anonymous. And it was really interesting that she talked about her perspectives on acceptance, because ultimately I think acceptance really is an empowering tool for everybody, you know, and it has to be used wisely, and it's really not easy to accept things the way they are. So this from episode 100.
Purely because women are accepting themselves, I feel. Like they're accepting their femininity and being able to, you know, hold themselves in a C-suite sort of boardroom. I don't know, something's changing. I'm always so amazed by the attitudes of young generations in just being confident with who they are. It's almost cool to be unusual. Whereas in my generation, it was weird to be different.
Yeah. It was. I've always described our profession as being conservative with a small c, if that makes sense. You know, it's always been smart suits and you know, and professional kind of respect for the hierarchy and all of that. And now you're absolutely right. I think gone are the days where you know, that whole scenario, that boardroom kind of feel has gone by the wayside. We work in different ways now. Young people, I think, are more accepting of their differences and their but yet their behaviours are very similar in that there's much more tolerance, there's much more respect for each other. And you're right, it is cool to be different. And I feel much more relaxed even now at my age with myself and who I am than ever I was probably 20 odd years ago, because that I'm working with a lot of younger people now, and you kind of think, okay, yeah, it's okay to do the things that I do and to talk about the things that I do, you know, and yeah, it does seem a much more diverse and much more accepting community.
Accept yourself for who you are. Accept other people for who they are. Accept life on life's terms when you can, when you know there's nothing you can do to change it. And I think that life will be a lot easier to navigate. That's certainly been my experience. It's also been my experience that it's really hard to know what's what and when I should accept and when I should do something and all of that. But that is part of life. Trying to figure out what you should do in every different scenario is part of life. Agonizing is part of being alive. Thanks for listening this week. Please do subscribe to this podcast and maybe even rate and review if you can. I'd love to have your feedback about this episode or any others that you've listened to, and maybe even some suggestions for future topics on this show. It's all about self-discovery and evolution on Innervation, so be kind and loving to yourself, and I wish you all a great week.